Welcome to our Dare to Share event. Today we will be talking about emerging trends in the customer experience of banks and financial institutions. My name is Juha Kronqvist and I'm a principal designer at Hellon. I'm really happy to have you all participating. Dare to Share is a platform where we want to open the hood to Hellon's work. We will be presenting things that we ourselves are super interested in and that we can share with the wider world. We have always aimed to push the boundaries of design and customer experience, so you can probably expect interesting topics in the future as well. A few housekeeping notes to start with. Your mics are muted at the moment. We will have a Q&A session in the end. If you want to ask a question in person, you can raise your hand and we can open your mic. Otherwise, you can use the chat function to ask questions or present comments at any time during the event. I will try to answer some directly in the chat during the presentations, and the rest we can cover with the time left after the presentation. Please be active with comments and questions, and we have also a few polls coming up, so you'll be able to give some input there. In case you are not familiar with Hellon, we are a boutique service design and customer experience agency with offices in Helsinki and London. We combine academic knowledge from human-centric design with machine learning and business design to help our clients create great customer experiences and reach their business targets. Regarding that, we actually have our first interaction now. We are really interested in the backgrounds of our attendees. So please, could you answer which of the following professional backgrounds you come from? We have options: design, business, technology, or some other field. And I will open the polling now. Interesting. Even though the topic today is in financial institutions, most of our participants, over half of our participants, come with a design background. So welcome designers to this event. And then we have business background, 24%. One participant comes from technology background, and then we have people coming from other fields, 21%. At Hellon, we offer three types of services for our clients. I'll illustrate these using these wooden figurines found in the office of innovative people from the history. We offer focus and future direction based on deep understanding of our customers. So this is our first offering. Here I'll exemplify this by using this figurine of Anna Wintour. She's a great example of someone who keeps on tap of what's trending now and in the future, and she has a lightning sharp focus in her editorial work. Also, her sunglasses are awesome. Our second offering deals with creating innovations and experiences that make your customers happy and attract new customers to your services. And here we have Salvador Dali, who was always innovating in new perspectives in art, and he was also great in creating wonderful experiential artscapes. So innovation and experiences is our second focus. And the third one is that we help people and organizations transform to meet the expectations of the future business landscape. And here we have David Bowie, who has reinvented himself at least a dozen times during his career, from the end of '60s until the very last days of his life. Rest in peace, David. Today, our topic deals with the first category, finding focus and direction. The talk comes from our London office and is led by our London CEO, Timo Patiala, and the lead service designer, Andy Patagis. In their presentation, they will cover key insights to changing customer behavior from various projects within the financial sector. So take it away, London.
All right, thank you very much, Juha. Looking forward, thank you, and we'll jump right into it. So We actually wanted to start this presentation with a bit of a narrative on how usually, if we talk about financial services, how do they usually present themselves, and then compare that with an actual personal experience of mine, just to kind of see the setup that we're already starting up with. So let's get into that. And also a disclaimer, we're not affiliated with the next video, but it's more of an example that we wanted to show.
When you think you're all alone, I'll wrap you up and I'll take you home. No matter what you're going through, I will look after you. When you don't know what you're gonna do, I will look after you. I will look after you.
Right, so this was a campaign that you see from one of the local banks here in the United Kingdom, with very often the messaging always being that, you know, we are an institution, traditional, we're always by your side, we will always be from generation to generation standing and helping you along. Though if we go more into the reality of things, things might actually not be exactly like that or what they deem to be. So the number that you see here on this slide is actually a time form, in the time form. So this is exactly the amount of minutes and seconds from my banking provider that they made available for me when I was discussing with them about my biggest life decision, being a mortgage. So I am a UK citizen here. I've been living here for almost 3 years. First time buyer, not really aware of how things are being done over here. So obviously I wanted to really get an understanding of how that is being done as a non-UK kind of native. And I contacted my bank, and this is how much time they were willing to give to me for my life's largest decision. With the main message being that they can't really help me until I actually have an intention to get a mortgage. So they weren't really willing to discuss the process or give any indication as to what I could be doing, which left me very much at the mercy of my own skills and my own kind of understanding to look into that. Even though this is a personal anecdote, it does kind of resonate with quite a lot of customers and participants that we have been researching across the years. What we're going to be presenting you today is really findings and synthesized findings of different pieces of research that we've conducted throughout the United States, in Canada, Nordics, in Finland and Sweden especially, and show you that kind of synthesized view. And hopefully this will also inspire you and give you some food for thought. Our main observation throughout the last year is the fact that the customer journey doesn't really work today from the landscape in financial services. A very kind of visual and strong example of that is here a customer journey that we've designed for one of our clients earlier, or an as-is view of one of our clients in the past. And as you can see, very often when we research, whether it's mortgage, whether it's anything at all around financial services, and we're in that research mindset, there's usually an element of surprise and excitement that something new is coming up. I'm curious, I'm talking about it with different people, and envisioning my life on how things can be and look like. But our research has time and time again indicated that once you start entering into the banking world, it does become a trip into the unknown. The processes are considered low points in the customer journey and the customer experience. And that is an emotive trend that we've noticed time and time again in our research. This is actually also being emphasized even more by more research that we've conducted, for example, in North America, where the same tendencies to come up. When asked in a survey that we had conducted recently on what are you worried about when it comes to money and finances? Like, what is the main concern? And we have identified 3 key points there. First of all, there are new patterns appearing on how people are spending, how people are accustomed to digitally native journeys. And there are also quite unfamiliar patterns of demand, and we're actually stepping out of these patterns of behavior that we're so accustomed to in the financial sector. Anxiety is constantly running high. Yes, obviously the last year has been very unstable and has been very anxiety inducing, but this has actually been an observation even before COVID has even been a part of our lives. We have increased vulnerability, increased insecurity, and there's more now than ever before, this lack of control. And many people are kind of seeking for that sense of control, but really can't find the source for it. And then last, but definitely not least, in the last years, we do notice that many financial services have actually pushed so much towards digital, towards UX, having intuitive interfaces, very exciting and interesting apps and mobile banking and all that. But actually what that has now resulted is that there is now a need to go beyond user experience. Just having a great UX and great interface is not really going to be sufficient anymore to really stand out in this world. And we do need to reinvent, innovate, and transform really what we're all about. This is emphasized even more with the other kind of dimension of our research, where we have actually asked people, what role do you see your bank having in your life today? And as you can see here, less than 20% of the participants in this research actually said that they find their banks inspiring. The rest of the survey, which is basically 80%, a staggering majority of the people that we've engaged with, have actually indicated that I feel the bank is basically a practical place to manage my money. It's a tool for my personal and my business plans. But very often the message that we would get back from our research is really the quote that you see on the bottom right. I'm ambivalent to banks. It serves what I need and it's there when I need it. So there's really not that sense of inspiration and pushing forward from the offering out there. This really comes to the point of, it seems very evident that traditional banks slowly are becoming less approachable, even though they do stand for security and expertise. And that is something that constantly has been validated in all of our research, that people do trust banks to a certain extent. They are secure, they are the experts in their fields. Many people would actually almost follow blindly what their banks are telling them. So there is obviously a layer of trust that should be taken advantage of. But then we also have this phenomenon happening in the last years where challenger banks, such as the likes of N26, Revolut, and Monzo that are exemplified here, have actually revolutionized everyday banking. And even though they're not able to offer a wider plethora of offerings, they have actually been able to exemplify that banking actually can be flexible, can be humorous, can be more human and digitally native. And that, of course, has changed what people are expecting from the more traditional banks. So this really comes into the question, all right, it seems that the journey is suffering a bit of a dip. Banks are not perceived as inspiring. What really has actually gone wrong here? Where has this happened? And thing is, we actually do need to go and have a look back at history. When we look at generations, really, if we start all the way from baby boomers and Generation X, we do see there a different type of life. We had the mindset of I can find a job. Jobs for life are pretty common. Jumping between jobs wasn't really a thing back there. Housing was affordable, renting was affordable. The reality of life really was very different. But then as we move on into the early 90s and up until today, we do actually see massive changes and shifts in people's behaviors, which has actually resulted in life becoming more precarious, more unpredictable. There's patchwork and self-employment that's becoming increasingly common. Generation rent is a big thing. It's not, you can't really get into the property ladder anymore. There's increased volatility and insecurity. And even though really what I'm here might sound that the baby boomers had it differently, actually, if you really look at things even more closely, this is an experience that everyone is going through from the early 90s and up until today, regardless of what age group you belong, whatever behavior you're actually demonstrating, or what life stage you're at. This is the reality that everybody is getting accustomed to. We have different ways of working. Property ladders and housing is becoming increasingly expensive. The volatility and insecurity is still there, especially now. There are behavioral shifts. So this is really something that we need to be aware of. With this message in mind, before we actually go forward into into the next section, we actually wanted to have a bit of a pulse with the audience here today and really hear what is your take in regards to your understanding and savviness around finance, just to kind of see what is the vibe today. And then I'll hand over to Timo to continue. So Juha, please push out the poll for the people to respond to.
Any comments, Andy or Timo?
It looks to be quite in line. And if we jump into the next part, is that this is some of the results of a study that we conducted in the US and then 2 other European countries. And basically what it says is that if we wrap the 2 biggest brackets up, around 65% of all the people across different demographics feel that they are okay to manage their day-to-day finances, but they do not feel comfortable with anything to do with finances. And if we think about, even the demographic here today, we're not necessarily the fully representative, demographic split of anyone that uses the banking services, and still a large majority does not feel super comfortable with managing their finances. And when we started exploring this, obviously it was something that we found out that was very interesting, that people are very sort of unfamiliar with finances and not even comfortable. And then we started exploring the side of entrepreneurs. And when we started exploring this, we understood, going beyond personal finances and exploring new entrepreneurs and people thinking about becoming entrepreneur, the majority of new starting or just founded entrepreneurs had actually asked their friends and colleagues about assistance with setting up their business accounts. They did not go to their traditional bricks and mortar banking services providers. They actually went to their friends to ask, how do I manage my business finances? And a staggering 50% of the people that had set up new businesses actually chose a different provider than their bricks and mortar banks. So what it means, it's not just private individuals. We are having across the board with new entrepreneurs, SMEs, and actually, common people like you and I working in a situation where we don't really understand. And the common narrative in our research has indicated that most of the people that we talk to regret the fact that they didn't have the right education, they didn't know when to start investing, and that they basically spent too much and invested too little in their time. And one of the reasons for this is that, we saw the lovely ad by Lloyds, we're there throughout your journey from when you're born and, all the way until you retire and whatever comes in your way. And that's the way that banks are still built. They're built to serve a path that doesn't necessarily exist anymore. It is a linear path of, you get born and your parents set up a bank account for you, you study, you get your job, you buy or rent a house, you start a family, your children move out. The biggest thing that might happen is that, God forbid, your children move back in, and then you retire, and that's it. Whereas we know for a fact that life today is not linear. We are sort of, it's not the way it was before. It's way more complex. Traditional career paths are not applicable. We are living this weird winding path beset by, things coming left and right. And the life today looks like, you might study for a very long time. After you graduate with a huge amount of mortgage, or not mortgage, student loans. So you're already in a massive sort of debt. You might be unemployed for a while. Then you get your first job, and then you decide, okay, I need to do something else for myself. You might take a career break, or you change jobs, or then you realize that, you get a health scare, something happens to you, or you're mentally drained. You start working part-time. So basically the narrative is that, we are living in a whole different way than the way that the banks are built. And basically what it means is that there are many things affecting our relationship with money. And, especially when it comes to sort of key life changes, we are affected by so many external factors that affect our finances that we just don't have the cognitive ability to keep up with. I mean, we're as human beings unable by the majority to understand how everything affects our finances. And what we mean by this is, first of all, this unparalleled age of anxiety that we're living in, that affects our finances. We have different sort of global crises that affect our finances. There are political uncertainties that affect our finances, cultural shifts, and it's impossible to understand how these affect myself. On top of that, what we already sort of displayed earlier is this financial literacy. We don't have the ability or the understanding how to take care of our finances. The world is becoming so much more complex all the time. We are having this huge responsibility into sort of, understand I need to save in order to get on the property ladder, or I need to save in order for, the bad days, or if I lose my job, or if I want to change a job. But at the same time, we don't have any formal education for it. Even basic level sort of financial literacy skills are not taught. It's almost like a hand-me-down. If your parents, they teach you about money, they set up your first bank account, and then there are some people that are interested about it, they explore it, they might study it, and then they get really good at it, or then it just becomes a thing where you deposit your salaries and then you basically use it as you use it. And then the third thing, which is affecting, the world has become such more a digital place, and money has become such an intangible thing. It's not like you get your paychecks as a checks that you go and cash and you get money and you put it in your bank account. I can't even remember the last time that I actually took money out of an ATM. Money has become very intangible. And what this causes is sort of a divergent dilemma. It means that we only get instant gratification of money when we spend it. I tap my card, some digits move on my bank account, and I get something. Whereas saving is very intangible. I put digits onto another account where there are digits, and it doesn't really gratify me. It's there, and I don't even exactly know, a savings account. What's even a savings account? It's 1% growth on annual. So it doesn't really, you don't understand how quickly are the money moving, what happens to my money. So there is this sort of dilemma that, we just don't know what's happening with the money. And ultimately, we don't even know what money is anymore. Can I even go to the bank account and get all of my funds in cash? So what we are sort of finding out here on the work across the US, a few European countries, and then discussion with different experts, is that the banks, even the brick and mortar banks, the big banks today, should play a much stronger role in supporting their customers to overcome these sort of barriers to having a healthy relationship with finances. There should be a lot more sort of education on money and sort of even, hand-holding in helping people understand how I can make my money work for me. And Andy's case was a really good example. Lloyd says that They're there with you from cradle to grave and help you in every slippery slope or icy patch. And you got 6 minutes and 43 seconds. That's hardly exactly what being there for you means. So how do we fix this? What kind of opportunity areas do we have? And with this, I will let Andy take you through some of the findings or some of the potential opportunity areas that banks might have.
Yes. Thank you. All right. So with that background, obviously now moving on to pretty much the last section of and leave. We want to also have some time for discussion and reflections. How do we actually fix this? What are the opportunity areas that we've identified really here? So if we look at mainstream financial services, it could actually be visualized almost like this triangle of services where you would have traditionally, you would have the more transactional side of things on the top, which is what we are more accustomed to. We have more touch points with it. We interact with it much more detail. Then we've got the savings, the mortgage side of things, either as an individual or as a representative of a business entity. And then we've got the whole world of investing. And then across the path of all of these different endings, you've got the whole facet of wealth management and financial advice. When we look at this triangle, one thing that we also mentioned in the very beginning of this is that from a transactional point of view, the challenger banks that we exemplified earlier have actually been really good at already dominating that area. They have exemplified what digital native actually means. They've simplified the language. They're informal, they're humorous, and the interfaces are friendly. You see cute animations and emojis and all that. It's become more approachable. And from our research, we have been able to actually indicate that really looking at transactional side of things, that might not really be necessarily really the place to innovate and reinvent what you're currently offering, because the offering today already is pretty good, and it will be really difficult to jump out. But there are the other three kind of layers in the bottom of this pyramid where very little innovation actually has happened. Maybe on the area of investment that I'll cover in a bit, but other than that, very little has actually happened in the more, let's say, complex entities when it comes to mainstream financial services. So I'll actually go through some of the opportunities that we've identified to provide some food for thought. When looking into the side of mortgages and loans and so forth, one of the biggest opportunity areas that we've identified is really that there is a huge need to innovate on the product offering for these non-conventional businesses. It has come time and time again, especially in the qualitative side of the research that we've conducted. So we've interviewed both, entrepreneurs, serial entrepreneurs, smaller, medium-sized enterprises, even high net worth individuals who have actually said time and time again that the product offering that is currently out there by banks and financial services is not flexible or not existent really for what they would call the modern 21st century businesses, whether you're a freelancer, you're self-employed, or doing being part of the gig economy and so forth. Even though many of them actually have done really well for themselves. So they do have a stable financial profile, but because they don't have that, they are not fit into that conventional box, they have actually struggled a lot. We've seen an interesting trend as well that many, especially entrepreneurs, would actually still depend on their personal account. So they wouldn't even establish a separate business account. They would have their own personal account because they really didn't feel that the business account would provide any extra value for them. So many would still use their personal ones. And that's really a result of the fact that these kind of non-conventional practitioners, they feel invisible, they feel that they're receiving irrelevant support. And many times we've received the feedback that even when they did actually reach out to their banks, it always felt as if they were being pushed products that really don't match their needs. And it was more about this mindset of selling something because I really don't have anything better to offer you. So yeah, but then in the other, and what we want to emphasize though here is, the opportunity area is really actually huge. Like if you look at the graphs on the right hand side from a statistical perspective, you see in the likes of US, UK, and Finland, we're already at a ratio of 15 to 30% of people actually not being in full-time contracts anymore. And Sweden, even staggeringly, almost half of the population, working population, is already in a different type of working format. So the audience for this sort of innovation is huge. And unfortunately, at least in our research, we haven't really been able to find anyone who's been able to innovate. What can we actually offer to these non-conventional businesses? When we then shift over to the middle area, which is all about the area of wealth management and financial advice and literacy, which Tim also emphasized a bit more. Really, one thing that we have identified as a huge opportunity is what's happening with the retail channel and the brick and mortar channel. Very often, especially when we talked with experts in the financial world or with stakeholders within the finance world, very often the message that comes back is that retail is dying. Should be closing down our physical manifestations of our service. Nobody's really going to cash in a check. Nobody's really going to go, maybe to change currency or whatever. But when we look at the customer side of things, it actually means, or what has been surfaced, it's mean that the brick and mortar actually has a completely different role to play. As we said in the very beginning, because of this push to digital that many banks have actually really emphasized on, there is this phenomenon or a result where customers are feeling constantly more alienated, more distant by their banking service providers, but they still actually lack human interaction, especially within that area of financial advice, and really making it in a way that it's friendly, it resonates, and it speaks their own language, rather than them having to learn how to speak to their bank. Some examples that we have here is, offer more foresight. What sort of projections can you provide? What's the interest accruing actually looking like? Presenting that in a visual manner is already something that can help in this area. Helping customers to really plan for these long-term plans, and also offering short-term achievable goals. So especially, for example, in the realm of mortgage, which I told my own story, I've been saving now for a while, and I didn't really have much instant gratification from any of that. It's just money being accrued into this pot that is just there, and there's really no instant gratification that we are so accustomed to in this fast-pacing world that we're living in. So how do we actually help people have this feeling of gratification and almost simulate the sense that they get from spending? Proactive advice. Very often still banks provide their service on a more reactive basis. So I, as a customer, need to reach out to my bank to be able to surface my need. But there is already such an abundance of data that can surface behavioral patterns, and using data in a more smart and efficient way, we are able to offer also more proactive advice when also within the experience in the brick and mortar. And like I said, beyond the mortgage, making saving, making investment, feeling as tangible and rewarding as spending is really good. We've actually seen manifestations of this sort of reinventions of retail in some channels. So on the right-hand side, there's actually a picture of a benchmark in Canada, where a bank called Blue Shore have actually established a network of what they call the financial spas. So they have actually eliminated the whole retail channel as a traditional kind of transactional channel, and they've created these very beautiful immersive spaces where people exclusively go there to get advice and make it more approachable. And the interior design has also been made in a way that is very enticing. So this is actually already happening in the world of brick and mortar, but for now, it's still more exceptional cases here and there rather than what is de facto now. And then last, but definitely not least, in the world of investment, actually, we are seeing, out of the three that we're prioritizing here, I would say the world of investment is the one that has seen maybe more innovation around gamification. There's more and more apps appearing that make investment more approachable and friendly. So that's already happening, but there's still a gap there as to what else can we do in the realm of investing. And something that has come up is that investing really seems to be the gatekeeper when it comes to changing that perception that people have about banks, towards co-creating the future. What do we mean by that? Is that there, in this current world and this current setup, we actually see, regardless of age groups, like I said in the beginning, there is an increasing demand towards liability of any service provider, whether it's banks, whether it's mobility, whatever, but any service provider on its social and environmental responsibility. We need to kind of start switching also the mindset, not only designing for the user, but also to designing towards all life altogether. And in concrete, and the first steps to actually concretize that is through the realm of investments, because that's really where people are seeking for that first and foremost. We're able to kind of predict that the brands who will win in the financing world are going to be the ones who increasingly have more consumption, or are able to navigate the people's anxieties about their consumption, offering alternative engaging experiences and so forth, and really showcasing where their money is actually being invested. And this is not just for environmental initiatives, but overall about societal growth and resilience altogether. So again, not going into the realm of greenwashing, but really having an array of investments that people can actually resonate with ethically and on a value-driven basis. Again, another interesting example here is the benchmark that we have on the right-hand side, which is an Italian challenger bank called Flowy, who've actually focused exclusively on that whole area of sustainability. Everything that they offer is purely on that domain. And they've been one of the most successful startups in the Italian market. They've gone to the extreme even of offering credit cards in the form of a wooden card, but also in the area of investment and so forth. They are much more transparent and flexible when it comes to where you can invest. And that has actually been a winning factor for them to differentiate in the market. So yeah, with these three opportunity areas and these three factors, we do believe that by pushing towards these different directions and still sustaining the innovation that has already happened in the world of transactional accounts, we do see that we can actually fix this narrative that we have surfaced. And now more than happy to move into questions either for myself or Timo.
Thank you for that insightful and well-argumented presentation, Timo and Andy. I'll ask you now to stop the screen share so the attendants can see your face better. So now it's time for some questions from the participants, and this is one of the most enjoyable parts of these Dare to Share events, where we get to kind of discuss this topic and where we kind of get to co-create some answers that this presentation to questions that this presentation might raise. And we can use the chat to present questions, so you can just write your thoughts or comments or questions to the chat, and I'll read them aloud here. Or if you want to ask them yourself, please just raise your hand and I'll open your mic and you can ask the question using your voice yourself. And so let's start with the first question that we had in the start. This came from Salome Santa Maria from, I believe, Denmark. Welcome, and thank you for the comment. So Salome asked that it seems that most of the studies came from the US. So was there any particular reason for that decision? And a question also, how do the results compare to the Nordics?
Yeah, I can answer that, and then Timo can fill in. But yeah, so to more explicitly describe the background. So here, what you've seen today is actually a synthesized view of one study that we did in the UK, US, Sweden, Canada, Finland, and then a mortgage planning project that we did in Finland exclusively. And then there was also one third project. So this wasn't exclusively coming from one specific initiative. It's a synthesis of some. So obviously the survey, for example, some of them were more US and North America specific, because the research was conducted on behalf of a client that was operating within the US. But I think the interesting thing here really is that regardless of what survey results we looked into in the North Americas or Europe or whatever, the trend was almost identical. I would say that the Western society overall has surfaced very similar nuances in terms of their behavior, in terms of how the banks resonate with them. So yeah, and the US was just shown mainly because of the fact that the sample size was slightly bigger, but the numbers and the results were otherwise quite identical. I would say the only significant difference was in Sweden. Actually was the only market that has showcased more financial, like a perception of more security. So the Swedish market was the only one that actually had that feeling that, you know, I'm not as precarious, or if I am, I feel more confident. I think the Swedish market was slightly more exceptional, but we do, the rationale for that, I believe, is because the banks have actually, for example, in the world of investment, they've done a lot of work already reinventing and innovating within Sweden how to make that more approachable. So there is already quite a lot of interesting innovations happening in Sweden, and that shows already in how people perceive their banks.
Great. I think what I noticed also in your presentation was that in Sweden, there was a very high proportion of respondents where these kind of freelance or small business entrepreneurs. Do you have any comments on that? What do you think this is? It was, I believe 50% of the respondents.
Yeah, it was a surprise for us as well when we looked at the statistics and interest, and I think that was also kind of exemplified in our, so the insights that we saw show here is a combination of both qualitative and quantitative, a lot of interviews, focus groups, surveys, and so forth. And then when we actually conducted the actual recruitment for the research in Sweden, even though many people came in with that hat that I am an individual, many of them actually were freelancers or doing gigs and stuff like that. So even though they didn't explicitly state that, the likelihood of them doing more of an alternative work was much higher. Again, I think because of the fact that Sweden has demonstrated more comfort, that actually now is shown and exemplified in also the percentage of the working population that is more comfortable moving into it. I know that the government also in Sweden is really pushing towards that direction, and it seems they've been quite successful with when it comes to startups and so forth. But the feedback has actually even also been from Sweden that they don't feel that their banks are as flexible as they should be for them.
And just to add to some of the differences between the regions, I think one of the major differences that we also noticed that within our research in the US, and especially exploring sort of finances and savings, actually it was 70% of everyone that responded said that having a potential to save or create savings or manage their finances was already perceived as a luxury. So that there is this mindset that saving isn't for everyone because it's never been taught, and maybe it is, you know, a cultural difference. Whereas in the Nordics, there was this strong understanding that, you know, the basics and the foundations for, you know, your relationship with money comes from your family, not from your school. And, you know, if your parents do a good job in teaching you about the value of money, then you are in a good sort of situation. Whereas in the US, it was quite different.
That's interesting. So kind of like financial competence is inherited as well. We have some comments from the chat and the Q&A functionality, and I'll first read out this question by Evan Davenport, and Sam, I'll read your question after that. So Eva writes, is there a reason why banks struggle with freelancers? That, or actually Eva starts that she has a comment that this is an excellent point on not catering to freelance enough to freelance or an entrepreneur market sufficiently in the current system, despite this way of working and operating is on a rise. So we are like very much in a gig or content economy. And she follows this up. So is there a reason why banks struggle with freelancers or contractors or entrepreneurs or startups? Is it risk? Is it risky business for the banks? How do you square that with post 2008 with highly regulated banking environments that are so risk averse? Is there anything coming up from the research or your design work that would kind of help navigate this?
Well, I can start off with saying that that's a really valid point, and it again illustrates that banks are not transforming as fast as we expect them to be. And yes, it is probably because the system regarding loaning and banking is actually predominantly the same as it always has been, and gigs and freelancers and contractors are seen as riskier than if you're on the sort of boomer path and you're on a sort of predictable career path. And the funniest contradiction against this is that, yes, there is a sort of highly regulated banking environment, but at the same time, there's never in the history been as much loose money as there is currently in terms of, we have very low interest rates, especially in Europe. Currently more investments are being made into startups and sort of, scale up companies than ever. So there is a lot of liquid assets on the market, yet traditional banks are keeping their sort of, the way of working the same as it's always been. So it is a contradiction. And unfortunately, there's nothing that our research actually says that any bank is actually acting on it, but it's clearly one of those opportunity areas that could be explored.
Sorry, yeah, one thing that I can add also to that is it's a sum of a lot of things. So yeah, the what Timo mentioned, but also there's the fact, I think banks are actually not even fully aware that they are serving such a majority, because many, like I said earlier, many individuals who are doing non-conventional work don't even go to their banks to say that I am a freelancer. There's actually almost a sense of fear that if I reveal myself as a freelancer to my bank, that will change my profile. So many of them, like we said, they prefer to keep in their, like, I have a personal business, I'll conduct all my business through my personal accounts. So, I won't be flagged as a risky profile. So that's one. So banks don't even have the visibility right now to the reality of their customer base. And so that's basically the main point. And the second one being, yes, there is a certain risk averse profile, like a behavior, but there's also the fact that banks still kind of split very traditionally consumer, enterprise. I've got these products for consumer, I've got these products for enterprise, and you need to tick certain boxes to be eligible to enterprise solutions, even though more and more often we've seen in our research that people do switch hats very often. So it also feels actually more intuitive almost for them to use their personal accounts, because especially when you are practicing a work that is your passion, you don't have that strict split in your mind. But then because banks are structured with, we have this silo, this unit working on this thing, we've got this unit working on this thing, but people actually switch a lot between the two. And that switch is also something that banks are not still built on.
So there's kind of a path dependency, that how the banks are structured is kind of the old way, like you illustrated, that you get a job and you buy an apartment, and instead the society has changed and the structure of the banks is not keeping up. There's a related question from Sam about the kind of what kind of risks do traditional banks open themselves up with if they start offering financial management advice to customers. So how to kind of deal with this. I'll ask you to keep your answers short, because we have a couple of more questions from Aisha after this. So could you elaborate a bit? Of course, this risk calculations is not really our core business, but do you have any comments on this?
I think Andy can. Yeah, so this is actually a topic that we touched on in one project where we were designing this experience of financial advice. And the thing is, I mean, there are so many specific things that you can do without really being liable. So one main thing actually was that instead of you actually giving one and right direction to the individual, is to actually present them, you could do this or that, and these are the scenarios, and you can choose from this. So it's more about being more transparent about the variables and what things you could actually do, rather than being like showing them the one and only true path, because obviously then you might enter into a gray area that you don't really want to be at. But how we've designed it is that using data, also using data from a global versus local domain, and showing different scenarios and how things have worked out for other people in your profile and so forth. It's more about showing them potential paths rather than saying this is the way to go, or don't do it at all.
We have very good questions from Aisha, and there are actually two questions, so pay attention. So first one is that, did you notice that the US respondents were more concerned with debt, especially student debt? I would expect to see a bigger effect compared to European countries, where school is either free or very affordable compared to paying plus 50K annually in the US. So this is the first question about, did you notice this effect in the US data? And the other one is also a very interesting question, like, did you look at the effects of investment apps on the perceived sense of financial literacy? So there are apps like Acorns in the US or Nordnet in the Nordics, which make it really easy to do investments and move money around. So are these users really more knowledgeable, or are they still kind of unaware what they're doing when they're using these apps? Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, for the first one is about the debt narrative. Obviously, yeah, the US did actually show a much more heightened level of precariousness. And interestingly, when we did a validation exercise as well in the US versus UK for one project where we had these different manifestations, it was interesting to see that people in the US were actually more focused on their own financial well-being rather than learning from their peers, for example, and what I can learn from my community and so forth. Whereas in the UK and Europe overall, there was more of that openness to and sense of security that I can actually open up and discuss about this. So there was definitely more precariousness and almost like a sense of fear more in the US, but I wouldn't say that the difference was significant. It's just that due to the fact that there are more debts, there's also more precariousness. Yeah. And to the second point,
yeah, I can elaborate on the second point as well. It is true that we are seeing, and especially in the last year, Nordnet is a very good example. They have sort of tripled or quadrupled their user amounts in sort of people have clearly either they have in the pandemic, they have saved some assets due to not being able to spend, and they have become interested in what to do with the assets. We have seen a rise throughout all of our research saying that people are now interested in searching about options, and Nordnet is a really good example. There are also other really good apps that make sort of, there is a trend of making it simple at the moment, saying that you can create a saving where you always round up your purchases on your card for the nearest pound or euro, and those micro cents will go into different funds, and you can sort of start micro investing. Yes, there is a trend into this, but the reality is still the same, that it is still a minority of people that are actually using these applications. And even though these applications and services are made relatively simple to use, it's still, you need to be knowledgeable about the fact that how it works, because and as you mentioned, there is always risk, there is assets at stake, you can lose something, so you need to still be knowledgeable. And it doesn't sort of, even though we have these great services, it doesn't solve the problem that people don't understand how to manage their finances. Yes, it's easy to get an app and start saving a bit, but it doesn't, solve the problem of them understanding how does it contribute and how sort of and how does it change everything. But I mean, it's definitely the right direction, but it's sort of like people usually a bit later in their life realizing that there are these apps that they can use to start saving.
Thanks. to keep with our promise to end early, I'll just mention a couple of good comments in our chat. One of them is very interesting and very good point, is that there's also a challenge with immigrants trying to understand the different practices in different countries. And this is very potential ground for the banks to research in. How can they serve them better? Because the practices might be very different and range from different country to country. And another one was a tip. You should digging into Merkur Bank in Denmark. So they have a profile where they support smaller startup and have a very sustainable profile. So go check it out. Just quickly like to say a couple of things. One of the things is that our next Dare to Share is actually a CEO special. I'll share this slide so you can kind of see it. So this is about take a leap in value. And this is like it mentioned CEO. So this is our CEO, Jaakko Väänänen, and he will share in his view, how do organizations actually start planning for this post-COVID boom, like that it looks like to be coming. So this is on the, if I remember correctly, on the 16th of June. And you can click on the registration link that I just shared in the chat. I'll leave this window open so you will be able to do that. There's another link that goes to a questionnaire. So we would really like to have your input on how well we did. What kind of topics would you like to hear about? And this is very important knowledge for us to kind of continuously improve on these Dare to Share events. So with that, I'd like to wish everybody a great rest of the day, and we hope to see you soon in the following Dare to Share events. So thank you everyone for participating.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a lovely afternoon, everyone, or morning, or wherever you're from. See ya. Thank you. Bye.